Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. I'm your host, George Kerth, here along with the two other guys just being dudes, Tyler Snyder. Tyler, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing lovely today, George. Thank you for asking.
And Cody Roadcap. Cody, what's up, buddy?
Not much. Just happy to be back after missing last week's episode.
Good to have you back. Good to have you back. And we will talk more Aaron Rodgers for you because, of course, that's going to be the top of all of our shows, it seems like, until this whole thing's resolved. But a little bit else to expect today. We're going to talk running backs today. We talked quarterbacks last week. We are going to have the top 25 on the show, and then we're going to be posting the top 50 on thecouchgms.com. If you haven't checked out thecouchgms.com yet, you're missing out. We had two articles posted this past week. One, me defending my stance on Matt Stafford a little bit after Tyler and I's debate last week. And Cody did the prediction of the century for the 2021 season entirely by coin flip. So you got to go and see who won the Super Bowl according to Google's heads or tails. And you can always check us out on our social media channels as well. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the Couch GMs. So with no further ado, Cody, give us some news.
All right, so this week in hashtag Rodgers Watch, what's going on? We heard Matt LaFleur talk over the weekend at rookie minicamp that the team wants Rodgers back in the worst way. There's been reports out there that Rodgers is currently vacationing in Honolulu. Take that for what it's worth. It's just rumors, people tracking planes, kind of weird, but hey, it's available out there, so people are doing it. He's supposed to be on Kenny Mayne's finale of the ESPN next Monday. It'll be the first time he's speaking to the media since all this broke. We'll see if he's just having a good time with Kenny Mayne for his last episode or if there's actually news to come out of it. Other than that, we're still pretty much in the waiting game for this whole news, which will probably be until August. But Albert Breer, he posted on Twitter, Instagram, all that he did reach out to some GMs in the league, not the Broncos GM, not the Packers GM, but some other GMs to get an idea of a framework of a possible deal that could get it done. And this is what he posted. I want to get your guys' feedback. If you're the Packers, is this enough? Would you not do it? But the Broncos would get Aaron Rodgers and a 2022 fourth-round pick. The Packers would get quarterback Drew Lock, defensive end Bradley Chubb, guard Dalton Reisner, a 2022 first-round pick, a 2022 second-round pick, a 23 first-round pick, and a 2024 first-round pick.
That's way too much.
I'm still on the team. I say I'm still. You can't take that. That's not enough.
I mean, a potential future quarterback. I mean, you're probably still going to have Jordan Love outperform Drew Lock. Some offensive line help. Was that 3 firsts and a second? That's changing
for Rodgers and a fourth.
Like, I mean, I get you like Rodgers, but he is a 38-year-old quarterback who's thinking about retiring in the next few years, and you can completely change the direction of your franchise with 3 first-round picks, another potential quarterback to throw in the mix. Like, damn.
Yeah, I hear you. I think getting Drew Lock back doesn't move the needle at all. I think that's like they're just like, hey, take Drew Lock. So I'm not even counting him in the trade. I don't think it makes sense for the Packers to bring back a quarterback like Drew Lock when they have Jordan Love. Dalton Reisner, he's a good prospect, but we've seen the last 2 drafts we've invested already heavily in interior offensive linemen. I do like Bradley Chubb. We're probably going to lose Preston Smith and maybe even Zadarius Smith at the end of the year. He's a young, promising player in this league on a rookie deal still. So I do like that back. And again, the 3 first-round picks and a second, it's a big haul. But in all honesty, that's pretty consistent of what the 49ers traded to get Trey Lance, and he's unproven. Now, there's a huge age difference between 20. I think Trey Lance is 20 and Rodgers is 37. But the Denver Broncos know what Aaron Rodgers is. We just saw Matt Stafford and Jared Goff get exchanged plus 2 first-round picks. So for me, it's not quite enough. Maybe if they upped the skill players instead of more picks, maybe if they swapped out Drew Lock for Jerry Jeudy, or, they swapped out Dalton Reisner for Justin Simmons, even though the contracts wouldn't work out that much because he's a higher end paid player. But I think the player return needs to be a little bit more. But I'm still with the Packers. We're saying no to any trade offers at this point.
I
I
don't
mean,
know. I think there's got to be a point that they take something if you're someone's willing to offer something ridiculous. So I think the 3 first-round picks and seconds got to be pretty close on the needle. Even though I agree that Drew Lock is not really going to move the needle for me either. But let's be honest. Like Rogers is definitely in Hawaii right now because he's trying to get traded to the Honolulu Hawaiians. So
you
Or
know,
start his own franchise out there. Be pretty cool.
I've been sitting back patiently just listening to you guys. Couple things. One, that's way too much for Rodgers. I don't care if he's an MVP or not. He was an MVP last year. That doesn't mean he will be this year. He is 37 or 38. I'm not sure exactly which. I know it's somewhere around there. But I do know that quarterbacks do hit a wall at some point. I know Tom Brady's going to play till he's 60 and still be, perfectly accurate. But we've seen quarterbacks hit a certain age where they're boom, not good anymore. I mean, look at Peyton Manning. He was breaking records for most touchdowns, most yards in a season, and then the next year could not throw more than 5 yards. It's you quarterbacks fall off all the time. So to have somebody of that age be traded for that much, I think it's too much. I know his talent, but you do have Jordan Love, who you drafted in the first round to be a future star. So you're giving that guy the chance that the chance to finally play. One thing that bothers me is saying Drew Lock does not move the needle at all. It bothers me to no end because he does move the needle to me. As a Titans fan, if Ryan Tannehill went down last year when we were in our playoff push and we got Logan Woodside coming in, we're done. Look at the Cowboys fans who are like, oh my God, we're putting up 45 points a game. And then Dak Prescott goes down and Andy Dalton steps in, they're done. Season over. So you're telling me if you have Jordan Love, who's actually playing really well, you're in a playoff push, he goes down, and you have Drew Lock stepping in, I'd feel pretty good. That could be the thing that saves your season and still gets you into the playoffs. I mean, where would the Eagles be if they didn't have Nick Foles? Where would they be if they had an Andy Dalton or a Blake Bortles coming off the bench? They might not have won that Super Bowl. So saying that a backup quarterback doesn't move the needle at all is a little frustrating. The first round picks and the second round pick are huge, but you're also getting one of the best edge rushers in the league, and he's still young. Bradley Chubb is nothing to just gloss over. He's still one of the better defensive players in the league. I think the Packers would be getting back an absolute haul. Would they win this year with Jordan Love rather than Aaron Rodgers? Maybe, maybe not. But by getting all those first round picks, getting that youth, I think that sets them up to have a chance to make a run at the championship for the next 5, 6, 7 years if they use those picks properly, as opposed to having one good year to run at that championship, maybe two out of Rodgers before, the Packers need to start rebuilding. So I think it's too much to give up for Rodgers, but I mean, this is something we could debate all day.
Yeah, and I hear you with the quarterback debate, and we do want to move on. We don't want this to be a Rodgers show, and I guess maybe it's just Drew Lock. Like personally, if we're trading Rodgers, I want us to fully commit to Jordan Love. Let Blake Bortles be the backup, and we'll run with that. We don't need a quarterback coming in, but if we're going to get a quarterback, let's get a guy. Let's get a veteran guy that could be a backup or even this year's starter. Like switching teams, there's no rumors out there, but one of the other hot teams is the Oakland Raiders. A guy like Derek Carr, he was Devontae Adams' quarterback in college. He has starting experience. He's not super impressive as like that guy's going to go win us a Super Bowl, but would be a good mentor, and we easily could be replaced if Jordan Love does do well, or a guy we can count on um, moving forward. Or if we're looking at Denver, Teddy Bridgewater is in that same mold as well. So maybe just flip out Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, but then you have the contract issue. That's why I assume Drew Lock is in there. But we do have some other news. It's not all about Aaron Rodgers. We are
breaking news
talking running
first.
backs this week. Oh, breaking news.
The
I
Raiders
love
moved
breaking
back to
news.
Oakland. Apparently, the Raiders moved back to Oakland.
Wow. This is the
You said
biggest
it,
news
so
we've ever
that's
had break live on the show.
not really.
Oh, wait, I said Oakland?
You did.
Of course. I say they're always going to be Oakland. I don't care. They're always going to be Oakland. But let's get back to actual news, and that is the Jaguars had their rookie mini camp. We're talking about running backs today. Their first round pick, Travis Etienne, took only wide receiver snaps in rookies minicamp. What are your guys' thoughts? I know we're going to get into running backs a little bit, so don't have to spill all your beans. Does that give you guys any hope for James Robinson moving forward? Might be a PPR monster, though, if he is taking all the running back snaps.
Yeah, I would look at it more of a. I mean, I don't think these running backs are on the same level, but I would look at it more of a Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt kind of situation. If you get this guy who's really solid out of the backfield catching passes, the coach said worst case scenario we have an elite pass catching running back. If they feel like he's already developed as a runner, um, then they don't need to work on his running ability that much. You have James Robinson as your, uh, downhill running back, and then you have ETN coming out of the backfield catching passes, can take running snaps every now and then so that it keeps the offense fresh, keeps the defense guessing. It's going to be hard to stop. And it could be if they use them like the Browns have been using both those running backs, both of these guys could be valuable fantasy running backs. Granted, we haven't seen what ETN can do yet. It's hard to say that, James Robinson's anywhere close to Nick Chubb, but the possibilities are there. I think it's an interesting move. I like it, and it's actually before you think it's a stupid move to be doing something like that. It's also similar to what Le'Veon Bell did coming out of college. He played a lot of wide receiver snaps coming out of college, and I mean, look where he went. I know he's nothing now, but he was pretty big for quite a few years there.
That's true. I mean, we're also talking about a first year head coach that hasn't coached in the NFL before, so he's going to obviously do some things a little different. So I like the idea too of being able to take your running back, work on his hands in minicamp when you don't have that many players anyway, especially in a COVID situation where I think some of these teams had maxed like 21 people at their mini camps because of all the COVID restrictions. So can't really do 11 on 11. You might as well work on some stuff that's a little unconventional. I think it gives me a little more hope for James Robinson because I think then maybe he may see more running snaps. I was originally in the thinking that ETN was going to end up taking the job fully away from him, but I think now you could probably see more of a split. James Robinson will get majority of the carries probably, and ETN will have to work more in the passing game and in space.
Yeah, and like you did both mention, it was minicamp, no pads, so wide receiver reps are easier to practice than running back reps. Speaking of wide receivers, though, uh, Broncos wide receiver Deshaun Hamilton, he was going to be traded or cut. Well, he's going to be cut, waived, and he tore his ACL. There was a mystery trade partner. It appeared to be the San Francisco 49ers. He then went on to actually be cut. He cleared waivers, so he's back with the Broncos on their non-football injury list. And then lastly, in our news segment, the Giants signed Eagles running back Corey Clement. Eagles fans probably love that. Maybe they don't mind as much because the Giants gave them Devontae Smith. But I don't know what's in the water this year, but players are coming back and switching to tight end. We got Kelvin Benjamin, former first-round pick to the Carolina Panthers, has come back in his late 20s, maybe early 30s at this point,
I think
and
he's
he's going to
30
try
now,
playing
yeah.
tight end for the New York Giants. So I know, Tyler, you were high on him at one point because in a dynasty league, you drafted him, and then you had to hold on to him for years to your contract was able to cut him. But any thoughts on Kelvin Benjamin?
Yeah,
Is he a late round sleeper?
no. Fantasy wise, you still have Evan Ingram there, and they did sign Kyle Rudolph this offseason too. So they have two mediocre tight ends behind Evan Ingram. So yeah, he's not gonna play.
Agree. I don't see him even really touching the field or maybe even making the Giants. There's a chance though the Giants gave him a shot because Gettleman's weird and that's what he does. But he's gonna basically be trying out for other teams in preseason. We'll actually see a preseason this year where you can get some snaps on film, and if somebody's a tight end desperate team, he might end up going there to play tight end. He'd be the most wide receivery tight end in the NFL probably, so there's always a chance for fantasy value if he lands in the right spot, but we need to see where he lands first, which means he'd probably be more of a waiver wire pickup than a draft asset.
Kyle
Yeah, I'm
Pitts
not
has a
touching him.
lot to argue on that last
I would say
statement.
Travis Kelce
You're right.
too.
Kelsey
Travis
Waller.
Kelce too. Fair. It's just
Well,
someone that's
Kittle's a really
legitimately
good
played the
blocker.
wide receiver position, now going to tight end, as opposed to like Tebow was a quarterback, or these guys are actually tight ends. They're just really freaking good at catching the ball.
Yeah,
All right,
Benjamin's just a
I get what
receiver
you're
who got
saying.
fat. That's basically all he is. So I can see why he moved to tight end. Maybe he doesn't have the speed anymore with his bigger size. But guys, I think it's time to move on to the arguably most frustrating position in fantasy football, and that is the running back. You know, we always got the running back by committee. It's a position where people get injured left and right, where you think you know the backups, you think you know who's going to be good, and then out of nowhere, James Robinson bursts on the scene and we're all rushing to the waiver wire. So it's time to talk about our top running backs. We're going to go through our top 25 running backs. And like George mentioned earlier, all of our top 50 are going to be posted on the website. We'll update those as the season goes along, as the offseason goes along, so you are ready for your draft. But let's go ahead and start off our top 25 with number one. Uh, is there any question on who the number one is, guys? I think we're all pretty much in consensus.
Yep, you want to say it on the count of three? I mean, this will work great with our little bit delay here, but I'll count to three and we'll just all say it. One, two, three.
Christian
Lamar
McCaffrey.
Christian
Miller.
McCaffrey.
I knew there would be one.
Way to go,
I
George.
knew there would be one, and it had to be George. Of course, it's George. Ah, man,
Christian McCaffrey. That's what I said. I don't know what you're talking about.
it's a mega
Yeah,
delay.
I mean, the only thing you have to worry about him with he's coming off the injury last year. He only played 3 games, but he did average 24.5 points in those 3 games. So I think he's a pretty safe bet to win you some fantasy weeks. He's proven in the years prior to that he can stay healthy. I look for him to bounce back.
Biggest thing about McCaffrey that you need to remember is that he is a pass catching back. He is a guy that is going to be used every down. Even if it's not a running situation, he still has the ability to get the ball in his hands and make something happen. And the Panthers just rely heavily on him. They use him every down, which is probably a big reason why he got hurt last year. But it just makes him so valuable. He can put up ridiculous points on a weekly basis, and he's the kind of guy that can change your entire fantasy outlook for the week just with one play. So he's definitely got to be our number one. Now, guys, before we move on, just so you know, our rankings is each one of us ranked these guys individually and we average them out to get our Couch GMs rankings. So we are going to have a little bit of debate on some of these guys. The first one that we're going to have a debate on is our number two running back overall is Dalvin Cook. George and I have him as our third ranked running back, but Cody, you got him there at number two. Care to explain?
Sure. And also to adding on to what Tyler said, our rankings are based on a half point PPR scoring. That's point per reception, but we only take half point per reception. So that means I'm going to take the pass catchers first. You'll see that reflected in my rankings. Dalvin Cook had an incredible season last year. You know, it was lost because, or not lost, but it wasn't talked about as much because Derrick Henry went over 2,000 yards. But he did average about 21 fantasy points per game last year. And when you're putting up 20 plus points, especially for a position like running back, how we talked about have a lot of committees, this is a team that pretty much relies on Dalvin Cook. If you're not getting one of these top 5 running backs, you're not going to have as much success at that position. You can still win fantasy, but Dalvin Cook, he's a workhorse. He catches the ball. He runs the ball. Only thing I got to worry about him with his fumble issues. He has had 12 in his career, but he seems to be getting those down as the years go on. He had 5 last year, but only lost 3. So less fumbles, more scoring, and I think the Vikings are going to be a pretty good team.
Now, I mean, I'll intro us into number 3 here because I have a little bit of a debate between who our number 2 and number 3 are. And that would be Derrick Henry at number 3. Cody has him all the way down at 5. Tyler and I at 2. So I always view Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook as very similar running backs. And the reason I have Derrick Henry above Dalvin Cook, and I don't know if it's going to be the same reason for Tyler, I'll let you explain in a second, is even though we're in half point PPR, Derrick Henry is just more durable, so he does get more carries throughout the season. Plus, I have this inkling of hope of them having a new offensive coordinator that he's going to get a little bit more involved in the screen game, which should shrink their catches gap just a little bit. I look back at last year, it was 44 receptions for Cook to 19 for Henry. If you shrink that a little bit, there's no doubt in my mind that Derrick Henry is better than Dalvin Cook. And I have no problem with putting Derrick Henry ahead of some of these pass catching backs just because of the sheer amount of volume and his ability to stay on the field.
Yeah. So my reasoning for having Derrick Henry too is, uh, which
You're a Titans fan.
well, not only that, but I have actual legitimate reasons for it. And you know what? I'm going to preface this by saying, if you have the second pick in the draft and you can't decide between Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook, be comfortable knowing that you pretty much can't go wrong with either one of them. If there's one that you like better than the other, go ahead and take them, because these guys are very similar points wise. I think you'll be fine either way. Derrick Henry does sometimes struggle starting hot. First 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes he does lack a little bit, but he definitely comes alive. At the end of the season, playoff chase, he is definitely the guy you want to have in your lineup. But the reason why I have Derrick Henry higher than Dalvin is because if the Vikings get in the red zone, they can look at Justin Jefferson. They can look at Adam Thielen. They have these other guys, Alexander Matson or Madison, however it's pronounced. He is also a guy that can become involved. Where the Titans' number one threat outside of Derrick Henry is AJ Brown. But if you look at the other threats, Jonu's gone, Corey Davis is gone, Adam Humphries is gone. So you're looking at Josh Reynolds and Nick Westbrook Akinney as your other two receivers with Anthony Ferkser at tight end. If we get in the red zone, it's going to be everybody on A.J. Brown receiving wise. So we're going to keep relying heavily on Henry. We get in the red zone, we want that touchdown to go to Derrick Henry every time. That's why he's always one of the tops in the league in touchdowns. And I think that kind of value is just hard to find in fantasy, which is why I have Derrick Henry ranked too.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap up Derrick Henry with my thoughts because I am the guy that has him down at 5. I think that the top 5 running backs are your surefire players. So if you want to mix around, go for it. But he's at 5 for me for a few reasons. One, it's a new offensive coordinator, new head coach. Well, not a new head coach, but new offensive coordinator. They lost Arthur Smith. The last 2 years under Arthur Smith, he was averaging 18.4 and 19.6 fantasy points per game. The year prior to that, yes, I know it was Matt LaFleur. I'm a big fan of his. But without Arthur Smith, he was only averaging 11.6. Still decent numbers. That's obviously a reliable stat. And two, I had this, thought last year. We saw Christian McCaffrey get worked for 2 straight years. He had a lot of touches, a lot of everything, and he got hurt. And there is a thought spot in the back of my mind. I never root for injuries, but Derrick Henry has had he had a 2,000-yard rushing season last year. He was the league leading rusher the year before that. They had 2 playoff appearances, so he had extra games. There's a lot. The dude's a freak. Dude probably won't get hurt, but there is that thought in the back of my mind. Wow, he has worked a lot in the last 2 years. He might miss a few games here and there. He normally doesn't miss games, so that's why he's still my top
You
5.
bite
I
your
still
tongue.
would take him. Hey, I'm being honest. There's a lot of risk.
One of the
But for me,
biggest
it's
pieces of advice I feel like I can give is I was told a long time ago, and it's actually come to help me, never draft for injuries. If you think Derrick Henry's going to get injured because he's been the high volume and you pass on him for Alvin Kamara and Derrick Henry goes on to rush for 2,000 yards and ends up catching 40 passes, he's going to be by far the number 1 running back. And you passed on him for, say, Kamara bust. I don't know. That's just a random call. But you don't want to draft for injuries because you can't predict injuries.
no, absolutely, and you'll see that because I have a guy coming up that is often hurt in above Derrick Henry in our big 5. But I also, to your point, I think you always have to go with your gut. Now, if your gut tells you to take, Drew Lock in the first round, don't listen to your gut in that situation. But if you're sitting there at number 2 or number 3 and you're debating Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara, and your gut is like, man, it doesn't feel like Derrick Henry years. I think if they lose AJ Brown, they have no passing options. They're very thin at skill position. If they can put 10 people in the box because you're not afraid of any of their receivers, you can slow him down. What happens if this team gets behind? There's a lot of questions I have for Derrick Henry, but again, still the top 5 running back, still probably going in your top 5 of your fantasy drafts coming up. Maybe his rankings will change as the season go on. But speaking of going on, we have to move on to number 4. George already mentioned him a little bit. That was Alvin Kamara. Nope. Yes, we are at Alvin Kamara at 4. I almost wanted to go back to Derrick Henry. Just talk about him some more. No, number 4 is Alvin Kamara. I have him at
I
3.
love it.
Tyler and George have him at 4. Again, another guy sitting right there, still in that spot of workhorse work. Wow, can't even say workhorse running backs. His only
Workhorse.
questions are who's going to be the quarterback. Thank you, thank you. Who's going to be the quarterback for the Saints? But either whichever one it is, I tend to think it's going to be Jameis Winston. It might be Taysom Hill. I think between his rushing and catching ability, especially in half point PPR or full point, I would. That's why he's at 3 for me, ahead of a guy like Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, Alvin Kamara, I don't think he performs quite as well without Drew Brees. So not having him this year, I think, could hamper his fantasy outlook a little bit. I think it would be a little bit better if he had Jameis Winston as compared to Taysom Hill, but the Saints have confused us in the past with who to start, so we will find out on who their starter is. But still, like Cody was mentioning, he's just so talented that I don't think it really matters who's at quarterback. He's still going to find a way to get some points, and he's still going to get used. So, definitely some good value there at 4. Let's go ahead and move on to 5. Cody was hinting towards this guy earlier as a man that is often injured, and that is Saquon Barkley. Cody has him ranked 4th. George and I each have him ranked 5th. This is a guy that is injured almost every year, frustrates fantasy owners who draft him first, second overall, and yet we keep coming back to him. We just can't get enough. Uh, so why should we go after Saquon this year? What's going to be different?
I mean, literally, it just comes down to him staying on the field. If he's been healthy, he's produced. There hasn't been any doubt in that. I mean, the only time that you saw him play in games and not look great was him coming back from an injury 2 years ago. And by the time the fantasy playoffs rolled around, he was right back to being that high end RB1 that won a lot of people championships that tried to buy low on him. We know it because it happened in our league of record. But again, you can't draft for
Yes,
injuries,
it
so
did.
you just got to hope that he stays on the field. And if he does, he's going to be a top 5 running back. He has never done anything to prove any different.
Yeah, and I was going to add to that. If you listened to last week's show, I was the highest on Daniel Jones. Again, this is going with your gut type here. The stats do back it up. He has his two health, oh, not his 2 healthy years, but in 2018 and 2019, 2019 he was 14.8, 2018 was 18.4. So he has shown that he's able to do it. I do think the Giants take a step forward. I do like what they've done around Daniel Jones, adding offensive weapons outside of Saquon Barkley that helps him. And I think he's one of the last running backs that are truly not in a committee. Um, and with that, I would put him number 4. Derrick Henry be right behind him at 5 in my rankings. Again, just based on pass catching, and that's a big thing for me. And if it was standard scoring, Derrick Henry would be a lot higher. But before we move on, we got our top 5 out. Are we all on board taking 5 running backs as of right now before any wide receivers, or where would you start thinking? I know we're talking receivers next week, but is this how you expect the draft to go? These 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
I would say yes, mainly because you can find wide receivers late in the draft that end up being pretty good, or you can find wide receivers in free agency who break out every single year. There's not always that many great running backs that break out every year. We usually have like one in week 1 that just somehow comes alive. Otherwise, you're just kind of banking that you can pick up the guy off free agency that is replacing an injured running back. Otherwise, it's so hard to find consistent running backs, especially with the committees now. You have these guys that can get, 15 to 20 points every single week as compared to the guys that are getting you maybe 10 because they're in a committee. It's just, you got to go with running backs first. So those top 5, absolutely. I would say wide receivers are going to slot in right here at this pick, right around 6 is where you're going to start seeing guys like Travis Kelsey, and also the wide receivers start coming off the board.
I agree with you. And I think you're going to see 7 to 8 running backs in most first rounds. I think you'll probably see Adams, Hill, and Kelsey as probably the three mixing into the first round, along with 7 running backs.
I tend to lean the same thing you guys are saying, but we're talking running backs this week. And number 6 on our list is Ezekiel Elliott. He was a guy that was ranked high last year, but when you watched him play and you watched the games, it didn't feel like he was actually performing that well, even though his ranking might say he was a top 10 running back last year. Still pretty high on our list. He gets Dak back. My only question is Tony Pollard. He shined a little bit when Zeke was injured at the end of the season. Does he get more carries? I tend to think not, because Mike McCarthy doesn't like to run the ball very often. He likes the guy to throw 40 times. And Zeke is a part of the pass catching screen game. So that's why he's at 6 for me, but he is 7 for Snyder and 6 for George. If you guys have any other comments, but I feel like we're all on the same page here with Zeke.
I think he's going to play with a little bit more fire now that he has Dak back. That also just makes the offense in general better. And he's been very vocal on social media about fixing his fumbling problems from last year. If he can hold on to the ball, he's going to stay on the field even more. Dallas's pass catchers and running backs in general, I think, are going to be better if Dak stays on the field. So he still finishes a borderline RB1 last year. I think the jump to 6 is fair.
Yeah, I think you're fine with him at 6. The only reason I have him ranked 7th is because there's one running back that I like a little bit better than him, and that is our 7th ranked running back, Nicholas Chubb. I love Nick Chubb. He is a great running back. The issue with him every year, and the reason he falls down boards, is because Kareem Hunt. People are always afraid of Kareem Hunt coming in, stealing some of his carries, stealing some of his snaps, but we've seen it where Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are both startable. We've seen people last year who had both of them as their starting 2 running backs, and they did fine. I think the Browns have made it very obvious that they want to use Kareem Hunt, but Nick Chubb is still their number 1. He is still the guy that they want to lean on when times get tough, when they need to run the ball. He is the guy they're going to go to before Kareem Hunt, and he is so talented. He's an 80-yard touchdown uh, on any given play. He is just ready for that breakaway. And I think that Nick Chubb's talent is what makes him this high up. Um, Last year, I saw plenty of people pass on Nick Chubb because of the Kareem Hunt thing, and all he did was go out and put up 15 to 20 points a game for him while healthy. So you won't regret it if you take Nick Chubb high. I do think he is a borderline first round running back.
Yeah, I'm on the same page there. You know, especially second half of the season, past week 10, he didn't have a week under 11 and a half points. So that's great for him, for your owners out there. I am the guy with a little bit lower on him because, like Tyler mentioned, Kareem Hunt is there. So I have him down at 9, and then George has him at 7, which is where he's at. So Tyler has him at 6. Man, can't even read our own rankings where we got him. Moving on, though, number 8. And I think now is where we're done with like the surefire every week starters. I know we're only through 7 players, uh, and there's still some very talented running backs we're about to get to. But in my opinion, I would say after Nick Chubb, some of these guys might be matchup based. Some of these guys will be up and they won't be consistent. Maybe is a better word. Sometimes some weeks they'll get you 30 points, and other weeks they'll get you 10. Um, but to kick that off at number 8 on our list is Aaron Jones. I have him at 7. George has him at 8. Tyler has him at 9. I have him at 7 with the whole Aaron Rodgers thing up in the air. I think without Aaron Rodgers, he might get used a little bit more. But with the AJ Dillon filling in for Jamal Williams, I do like him in the passing game um, to increase a little bit, kind of like we saw against Kansas City 2 years ago, where he had like 10 targets. I think we'll see more of that in 2021. Again, if you catch the ball, you're going to be higher on my rankings.
Cody, you still struggle to read the rankings. I had him at 8. George had him at 9. You said it the other way around, but that's all right. We're not going to worry about that. Maybe this is why our ratings were higher the week you weren't here. Anyway, so I
Probably
could
the guy that can't
honestly.
speak does a podcast.
I'll just mess with you, Cody. We're supposed to mess with George. This is my apologies. Uh,
No, you can keep going.
I could honestly flip
Yeah, George love running.
Zeke and Aaron Jones. Personally, I think that they're very close, and I could see Aaron Jones outperforming Zeke. Um, I think Aaron Jones really came out and surprised us last year. He was a end of the first round, early second round running back, and he ended up being one of the top two running backs for most of the year. And he honestly was just putting up ridiculous amounts of points. I don't think he's going to live up quite as much to the points he was having last year in those big games, but he's still going to get some good points. Um, it's going to be completely dependent on what happens with the Packers. We don't know what Aaron Rodgers is doing, if he's going to be traded, if he's going to be there. If you have Aaron Rodgers there, he's going to want to air out the ball more. Does that mean that Aaron Jones is getting more pass catching? Maybe. Does that mean that he's actually going to get less points because, Rodgers loves to throw the ball? He likes to score the touchdowns through the air? Maybe. So, it's all going to depend. We need to see what happens with the Packers before we go too much deeper into Aaron Jones. But either way, I think you would be totally fine taking him at the end of the first round or early second round. It's a great position for him. You can't go wrong. So let's go ahead and move on to our next guy, number 9, a team that I can't stand, and that is the Indianapolis Colts and Jonathan Taylor. Cody has him ranked 8th. I have him 9th. George has him 10th. Uh, you know what? Jonathan Taylor was a good running back last year. Let's not neglect that at all. But at the same time, we were talking about him completely splitting carries with Marlon Mack, and Marlon Mack was still a very good running back going into last year, but he got injured early on. And unless there is some news that I completely missed, Marlon Mack is still with the Colts. He should be back fully healthy this year. I could see them splitting carries this year uh, with Mack being back. Plus, last year, near the second half of the year, Taylor got taken out almost completely on passing downs, and Naheem Hines became a more valuable running back at that point. People were picking him up and starting him. The Colts running backs were frustrating as a whole last year because we thought Marlon Mack was going to be the guy. So we had him early. And then Jonathan Taylor broke out. So we're like, oh, it's going to be Taylor. But then Naheem Hines became the thing. So we're like, oh, forget Taylor. Let's have Hines. And then it went back to Taylor. You don't know what you're going to get. That offense keeps it changing. You never know who's going to be that primary running back getting all the points. And Jonathan Taylor is going to frustrate you some weeks. He's going to be the guy that's only going to get you 2 some weeks, and he's going to get you 25 the next. So you need to be ready to deal with that. But otherwise, I think Jonathan Taylor is a good pick right around here.
I know he wasn't quite as good last year, but I think Jonathan Taylor's a lot like Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson was a great back, but like you said, he got taken out on passing downs for JD McKissick. And both of them were still reliable starting running backs in fantasy because they got enough touches and they were effective enough in those touches to stay, fantasy relevant. The only thing that worries me is exactly what you said with Marlon Mack. We were talking about Marlon Mack being a lead guy or being a big part of a split. And obviously that got disappeared when he tore his ACL. And they did actually go out and re-sign him. Like his contract expired and they brought him back anyway, which tells me I feel like there's some kind of plan for him in the offense. And it worries if Jonathan Taylor's workload gets lessened enough to knock him out of the top 10. But I think he's too talented to keep out of my personal top 10, which is why I have him right at the 10 mark.
Yeah, and I'm the guy with him being the highest. I'm the highest on Jonathan Taylor. I think Marlon Mack returning just seems more like a security blanket than an actual play for snaps. The dude he only played in 15 games last year, but finished as RB6. Maybe it's the fantasy playoff bias. 28 points in the first round, 15 in the second, 19 in the championship rounds. That's weeks 14 through 16. If you play week 17 the years past, you're going to play week 18 this year. Call your commissioner and change that because always end it a week early your fantasy seasons. But that's a debate for another day. And he still had 36 receptions last year, even though Naeem Hines was a big part of it. So I think Jonathan Taylor continues his growth. I think he could potentially take over a lead role. It will be a committee still there. Frank Reich comes from the Eagles background. He likes to use multiple running backs like most teams do in the league, but he could get up to that 60 to 70% share of the carry. And that's why I have him where I do. But let's round out our top 10 with a guy on the lowest on, and that is running back for the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm not going to move them like I did the Raiders, and that'll be Austin Eckler. George, I know it's because you're a closet Chargers fan, but tell us why you have him
Knew it
all
was
the way
coming.
up at 8.
First things first, pulling a page out of the Cody Roadcap playbook, pass catcher. Austin Eckler is a big part of the screen game. He catches passes, get him in space. Second, once he got hurt last year, all we were talking about was this is Joshua Kelly's time. They drafted him. He's going to go and take over. And then they played Justin Jackson. And Justin Jackson, as much as he's an all right running back, he's nothing special. Justin Jackson goes down. Oh my God, it's going to be Joshua Kelly's time. And they put in everyone else on their freaking depth chart, it seems like, that wasn't Joshua
Kalen
Kelly.
Balaj.
Kalen
Don't
Balaj was the
disrespect
big
that
one.
man.
You're right. Kalen Balaj was the big one. But there was a couple other running backs I don't even think they still have on the roster. But literally, other than him, there's nobody special in that backfield. Right now, it's Justin Jackson, Joshua Kelly, Larry Roundtree, who was a 6th-round draft pick, and Darius Bradwell. Yeah, I don't know who the last two are either. But so there's not really any competition for snaps in that backfield of anyone they seem to trust. So he's going to get taken out of a couple of first downs for a couple of other running back carries, but number one, PPR value. Number two, he should see a lot of volume, which is why I have him at 8.
I mean, personally, I still think it's a little bit high. I have him at 10, so I'm not much lower on him. Um, yeah, I don't know. Austin Eckler is definitely that guy that can catch passes. I think he's the kind of guy that, you know what, every year he performs and performs well and puts up good points, and yet every year we're like, I don't know about Austin Eckler. He's never really gotten the respect that he really deserves, I would say. Um, doesn't mean I'm going to move him up my rankings. We can go on to the next guy, however. Cody had him in the top 10, and that is Cam Akers for the Los Angeles Rams. Akers split carries last year, and Malcolm Brown's now gone out of that backfield. Akers didn't really get a chance to start until near the end of the season, second half of the season, and he really performed well once he took over that job. So, Cody, you have faith that he's going to perform to a higher level if you have him in your top 10.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Akers. We saw what he did those few weeks before I forget if he pulled his hamstring or his groin. But going back to that New England game, he had almost 20 fantasy points. We saw him take over as the lead back. I know Daryl Henderson is still there. He'll probably get some carries because, again, McVay comes from the Shanahan relationship. They all like to use running backs by committee. I'm not saying he's going to be a full-time starter, but I do like Akers' pass catching ability. He had 11, but what is that? 10 of them. Sorry, looking at the wrong numbers here. He had 11 receptions last year, but 7 of them came in the last 3 weeks of the season when they finally started to getting him involved in the passing game. I look for that to continue. I like Matt Stafford better than uh, Jared Goff. I wasn't here for that debate last week. If you do, check that out or read George's post. But I think it's a lot better for him to have a quarterback that is can push the ball down the field, take some pressure off the box, where I don't think Jared Goff could have done that. So that's why I put him in my top 10.
I agree with everything you said right there, Cody. So interesting how a couple weeks ago we were talking about one other guy that we haven't mentioned yet that could be a workhorse back, and he falls all the way down to 12 on our consensus rankings. Last potential workhorse back is Joe Mixon out of Cincinnati. Cody and Tyler have him at 11. I have him at 12. If he's going to get that many snaps, supposedly, why do you guys have him so low? I mean, I know I'm there too, but I want to hear your opinion first.
The offensive line.
And honestly, it's
Until they rebuild that.
yeah. I was gonna say, like I said in a previous podcast, there's those few guys every year that because they burned you in the past, you kind of have a sour taste in your mouth anytime you go to draft them. And even though you're not supposed to play with your heart, sometimes you do. And Joe Mixon's that guy for me. I've drafted him a few times high, and every time I draft him high, he ends up burning me, and he underperforms or he can't get healthy or something, and uh, it ends up ruining my whole season. Where if I don't draft him, somebody else gets him, then he seems to perform like a top 10 running back. So I just don't think I have the luck to take Joe Mixon. He's not a guy I even want to look at in drafts. And like Cody said, that offensive line is trash. How can you expect the running back to perform well if he can't get any blocking in front of him unless your name's Derrick Henry and you're getting hit a yard behind line of scrimmage on every play and still run for 2,000 yards? Not not the topic right now. Yeah, I don't think Joe Mixon has quite that same capabilities as Derrick Henry. I don't think he can perform as well getting hit in the backfield every play. And last year we saw it. He can't stay healthy if he's getting hit behind the line all the time. He can't seem to get in that space. He really struggled to stay on the field last year. So that's why I have him all the way down here at 11.
I think you have to see a really big jump from Burrow, which is saying something because he was actually good last year. And Jamar Chase has to make an instant impact to make another person to think about in that offense, to pull some pressure off of Mixon and that offensive line if he wants to be successful. As good as he was a couple of weeks before he got hurt, he started the season last year so slow. And it could exactly be the same way because their offensive line is still trash unless they can get enough weapons around him with success to get people out of the box. That's why I have him at 12.
So looking ahead
Yeah, and
at
just
some
because we have
other.
him at 12,
Go ahead, Cody. Sorry.
no, I was gonna say just because we have him at 12 doesn't mean we don't think he'll be a valuable running back. Your top 12 is traditionally considered your RB1s. So we still see him as a low end RB1. Um, it's pretty much health and offensive line. He'll probably have a slow start, like George said, because they did get new pieces there, but they need time to gel. Hopefully, he can get back. He could be a steal for the guy that is sitting, pick 7 through 12, and they get a receiver and Joe Mixon on the turn. Could be a steal. Could be a guy that ends up winning leagues, or he just can't stay healthy because they can't block for him. But that wraps up our top 12, which would be your RB1s when you're heading into your for our early fantasy rankings. I'm sure they'll change throughout the rest of the summer.
So looking ahead to some other running backs, guys. At 13, we have Antonio Gibson. Real quick on him, I would say we are big fans of Ryan Fitzpatrick on this podcast. We do love what Case Keenum gave us in the playoffs last year. It was exciting to watch. However, if I'm a defense and I have either one of them starting at quarterback, I am going all in trying to stop the run game. I'm not worrying about the quarterback, and which is why I have Antonio Gibson lower than you guys. But that is our number 13. At 14, we have Miles Sanders of the Philadelphia Eagles. 15, Chris Carson from the Seahawks. 16, J.K. Dobbins. And 17, we have rookie Najee Harris. You guys have any comments about any of those guys?
Well, first off, it is Taylor Heineke that performed in the playoffs very well.
My bad. I
So
don't know why I said
that's
Case
one.
Keenum.
Um, two things I want to note here. Chris Carson's another one of those guys that I feel like comes out and performs every single year, and we're always like, Chris Carson. So borderline RB1 could end up being right around there again. They always try to replace him, and they never seem to be able to. And number two, an interesting fact, Miles Sanders, I actually ranked him the lowest out of the three of us because Tyler had him at 13, Cody at 16, I had him at 17. I just think I'm unsure about the five-man backfield and how well the Eagles offense can gel.
I understand there is a five-man
Yeah,
backfield. I understand that there's way too many mouths to feed in that backfield. However, I am not high on Jalen Hurts. I said it before. I'll say it again. I think he was a flash in the pan last year. Didn't know how to stack up against him because they were expecting to play against Carson Wentz. You have a rookie you don't have much tape on, so you don't really know how to play defense against Jalen Hurts. Plus, it was a, you know, whatever. We're already losing. Let's just air it out. Gave him some good stats. I don't think it's going to be the same this year. I think that Hertz is going to need some help. I think he's going to need to rely on some of the other guys. I don't trust any of the receivers yet. We haven't seen Devontae Smith actually play in the NFL yet, so you can't just assume he's going to be great. So that guy that you have to lean on, in my opinion, is Miles Sanders, and that's why I think that he is a good fantasy back this year.
and the guy I'm going to touch on real quick in the list that Tyler read off would be Najee Harris, the rookie running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just a refresher, he's currently sitting at 17 on our list, but he is a guy that's probably going to get drafted a lot higher than running back 17. And when you're drafting rookies, you have to take it with it. You got to either go all in or understand it's a rookie and it might not pan out. it's like a boomer bust to begin your season. We look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year. As soon as he went to the Chiefs, he shot up. He was being drafted number 5 overall, didn't pan out. A couple years earlier, we saw Kareem Hunt when he was with the Chiefs get drafted in the first round. I know Tyler was like, I don't want to take Kareem Hunt, but he's the best guy here. I was like, dude, just take Kareem Hunt. It's going to pan out. He did pan out for the Chiefs. So rookie running backs are always a question. Um, so don't sway from your rankings. If you have him low, don't jump up to get him just because you're a Steelers fan or just because he's a rookie. It's not the end of the world if you miss out on a player you wanted, and it's going to happen whether you're drafting in the first round or the 15th round.
Definitely agree. And to get us to pick to number 20 here, 18 was DeAndre Swift. 19, we have David Montgomery. And 20, we do have, who Cody mentioned, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think the person I want to ask Tyler about would be DeAndre Swift. Cody and I have him all the way down at 19 on our boards. Tyler up at 14. Why are you so bullish on DeAndre Swift?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm bullish on DeAndre Swift that much. I mean, look at who else we're talking about here that I have. Before I go into what I like about DeAndre Swift, I have Antonio Gibson below him, which, like I said, play the run game. I'm not afraid of the quarterbacks. Chris Carson below him. Every year, the Seahawks are trying to find a way to replace Chris Carson. I don't see that this year is going to be any different. So there's always that risk factor there. J.K. Dobbins, I mean, Baltimore has 18 running backs and they like to play every one of them. And the one they play the most is their quarterback, especially in the red zone. If they're going to run the ball in, it's going to be with Lamar. It's not going to be with the running back. So that's why I don't trust JK. Najee Harris, you know what? I haven't seen anything from him yet. He hasn't been in the NFL yet. This is his first year. He's a rookie. Like Cody said, rookies are give or take. I am less high on him than I have been on rookie running backs in the past. And at the same time, Najee Harris is playing for the same team that had James Conner last year, that, he was mid-level, mediocre. So I don't see why any of those guys should justify being ahead of DeAndre Swift. And Swift, on the other hand, I think he's also a pass catching back. I think he's going to be a guy that, the Lions don't really have much weapons right now. They don't have other running backs in the backfield that you think are going to steal the carries. You don't have the receivers that you think are going to take a ton of the snaps, because with like Kenny Galladay gone, that's a huge loss. Marvin Jones gone. So I think they're going to have to rely heavily on DeAndre Swift. Um, One of the biggest things I always say is when a rookie quarterback steps in or a new quarterback steps in, the biggest things you need to watch out for are pass catching running backs and tight ends. Because when you're a new quarterback on a team, typically you don't want to sling it out, lose your job right away. What you want to do is build some trust on your team, get the ball moving. You do that by doing check downs to your tight ends and your running backs. Swift's going to be that guy for Jared Goff. Goff's going to want to build his confidence back up and prove that he's a good quarterback. Start by just giving it off to your running back through the air, on the ground. I think Swift is going to be very valuable and heavily used this year.
And I do want to hit on David Montgomery for a second as well here. Um, he won a lot of people leagues last year. He might go above RB19 just because of that second half he had, and he was ridiculous. Remember, Tariq Cohen is back. He's the pass catching back. He's going to take some of the snaps that Montgomery got last year. He's not going to get again this year. If they do the split correctly and use a split similar to what you see like an Aaron Jones has been in the past, Montgomery's going to be fine. But we don't know they're going to do it because they didn't do it before Cohen got hurt. And I don't trust their coaching staff and Matt Nagy.
You guys both have great points. And again, this is all, your mid tier RB2s. You're probably going to start pretty much every week unless there's a matchup that has a guy a little bit lower. So these guys are going to be drafted 3rd to 6th round, I would imagine. But let's wrap up our top 25. At number 21, we have Josh Jacobs. 22, Miles Gaskins. 23, Kareem Hunt. 24, George's favorite, Mike Davis. And 25, Melvin Gordon. The name on this list I want to talk about is Miles Gaskin, because Tyler apparently doesn't like this dude at all. But he's pretty much the only running back in Miami. When he came onto the scene last year, he was a top running back in the league. He can catch the ball. He can run the ball. They didn't bring in much competition for him this offseason. So it looks like they're going to roll with him. And Tyler just mentioned with DeAndre Swift, if you need a running back with a new quarterback and Tua, you can still consider new because he didn't play many games, and when he did, he got pulled. He's going to rely on his running back. They're going to rely on the run game. That defense is going to be built to win close games. They're going to get a lot of carries. He might not have the touchdown record or the touchdowns, which is why I have him lower, just because I don't think that offense will score a ton of points. But when they do, I think Miles Gaskins will be a big reason, a part of it.
So to give my reasoning for why I have him so low, real quick, I'm not going to touch on it too much. One, like Cody said, I don't think this team's going to score a lot of points. I think if they win games, it's going to be defensively. When you're not scoring points, that's leaving a lot of fantasy points out there up for grabs. So I don't think he's going to be able to get those points from the scores as much. Plus, I think you're saying that they didn't bring in any other running backs and stuff, but I think you're glossing over Malcolm Brown a little too much. I know that he wasn't fantastic last year, but he is a power back. If the Dolphins get down to, uh, you know, first and goal from the 3 yard line, 2 yard line, I could definitely see a guy like Malcolm Brown coming in and stealing that touchdown right up the middle instead of, risking getting your starting running back Gaskin injured on one of those short little runs, especially when Malcolm Brown does have that power to get it. I think that's going to steal a lot from it, but I really just don't see this Dolphins offense moving the ball too well right now. So, with that being said, I don't really like any Dolphins offensive players for any of my rankings, and you will see that.
All right, am I good to rant on Mike Davis for a second here?
Don't make it too long, George.
You have 30 seconds.
So I've been talking about the blatant disrespect of Mike Davis for the last few weeks. So here we go. There's so many weapons on that offense that no one's going to worry about stacking the box. They're going to be trying to cover Julio and Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts. And even if you line up Kyle Pitts in the slot, you still got Hayden Hurst there. And who else is in that backfield? Well, let's go look. Quadre Olison and Tony Brooks James. So you're telling me Mike Davis is going to get 10 to 15 carries a game because they might only hand the ball off 10 to 15 times a game with that passing attack. But with not a stacked box, you're not telling me he can't put up RB2 numbers? Like, I mean, I don't understand exactly why Tyler has him so low, or even most of the experts have him so low. When there's no competition in that backfield, he's going to get 10 to 15 carries a game, which is more than you want for someone you're drafting around pick 24. Mike Davis also posted a picture on Twitter this week with quads that look like Saquon Barkley, but that's not the point. He should see plenty of volume in an offense that isn't going to have the box stacked against him to be at RB2.
I just think he has a ceiling. I don't think I think he has a high floor, but he also has a low ceiling. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys that's going to get you 25, 30 points. Um, he's going to be that guy that gets you 12 to 15 at best. Not saying that's bad. For a number 2 running back, that's great numbers. However, I feel like at this point in the draft, when I'm talking about potential RB3s here, because I'd like to have at least 2 guys by this point if we're talking at rank 25. For running back 3, I want a guy with a higher ceiling. I want a guy that can break out, that can win me a championship because I snagged a stud. And I don't feel like Mike Davis is that guy. He can get you those consistent points. He can be safe. But at the same time, you have Matt Ryan, who's a former MVP that is now, almost being forced into retirement because he's not playing up to level. And he's got weapons upon weapons upon weapons. You also have a new head coach that is an offensive coordinator that's going to want to be flashy. He's not going to want to just run it in. So I feel like when they get in the red zone, they're going to want to get those touchdowns through the air. And again, that defense is so trash that I don't feel like they're going to get up points so fast that they're going to be able to just turn to the run game. I feel like they're going to have to be slinging it all game long to keep up. It's going to be a lot of high scoring games. So that's why I have Mike Davis a little low for me.
Yeah, I think you guys both made great points about Mike Davis. We have him at 24, back end of RB2. Also, it's going to be based on the players you draft before it. If you're a guy that's really going hard for Travis Kelsey, or you really like Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs, and you're in the back half of the first round and you want to double up on those guys, you might want to take a guy like Mike Davis as your safe RB2 at this point in the draft. But if you took, Derrick Henry and you got around and got Antonio Gibson, so you might want to be the guy, like Tyler said, get your RB3, a guy that could potentially boom, might break out onto the scene, maybe get one of the rookie running backs that hasn't been taken yet. Um, and if you don't know who those are, you can check out our website for our top 50 way too early fantasy rankings. Real quick, I'll start with Tyler. Is there any guys you want to talk about in your top 50 that we didn't get on or get to?
Yep, real quick. We have Travis Etienne, the rookie running back drafted by the Jaguars. Like we said, he is taking receiving reps by the Jags. He could potentially have that Kareem Hunt role. So if he's not even a top 25 ranked running back and he has the potential to be that Kareem Hunt role, right there is value. There's your running back 3, running back 4 that has that potential to break out and be big. Plus, you got to remember that Trevor Lawrence and Etienne both played together in college. They have that connection already. They're going to hook up well. The other guy is Ronald Jones. I know everybody's looking at Leonard Fournette, playoff Lenny. At the same time, playoff Lenny was there all year last year and he did nothing during the regular season. No matter what he did, he could not steal the job from Ronald Jones. Jones is still the guy, and I think that the Bucs are going to rely on him just as much this year. So I think Ronald Jones is another guy to keep an eye on.
I'll go ahead and touch on the New York Jets backfield, which there's not a lot of Jets in the tops of any of our rankings, but their team's going to be a lot better this year than it has been the last few. Part of it's because of the coaching change and finally getting Adam Gase out of there. But Michael Carter is a sleeper in your fantasy leagues because there's no set RB1 in that offense yet. There's a couple of guys that could go out. There was LaMichael Pirine, who was a draft pick last year. Tevin Coleman, who's coming off 2 ACLs and coming from San Francisco. And then there's Michael Carter, who was a draft pick this year. There's a chance with the new regime they're going to try to give Michael Carter the first shot because it's, this coach drafted him and you got to get the young guy in. You could also see that same argument for LaMichael Pirine, but you're most likely going to take him as an RB4. And that's a good chance of finding an RB4 that who ended up being a starter and being a boom. So I like taking Michael Carter in your late round flyers, and you could end up with a starting running back out of it.
Yep. And then the last two guys I'm going to talk about real quick in our top 50 are two guys I think we might be undervaluing a little bit. They're probably on the safer side, and that is running back James Robinson. I know a lot of people have dropped him drastically because of the Travis Etienne pick, but we talked about it. He's playing wide receiver. He could be the passing guy, but Robinson is still probably going to be the goal line back, and touchdowns are the most important thing when it comes to fantasy points. So he'll probably have a higher chance of getting touchdowns. And the other guy is David Johnson. I know some of us in this podcast are Philip Lindsay fans. I tend to lean not towards Philip Lindsay. David Johnson, he had decent numbers last year, and I think we're kind of just writing him off because the Houston Texans are garbage, and they are. But he might fall to your double-digit rounds, and you might be able to get a solid guy that will get 10 to 12, maybe 15 carries a game. And if he's there late in your drafts, it might be not a bad option to get a guy you can at least count on for 10 points on if you need a running back in a pinch. So that's my thoughts, but check out the whole top 50 on the couchgms.com. Before we go, we're going to have a quick little, I'm going to say debate, but I don't think it's going to get too heated like some of our debates. But pretty much, what is the most valuable handcuff? And then George, why don't you tell people what a handcuff is for our listeners out there that this might be their first year playing fantasy?
All right. So a handcuff is something that comes along in the running back debate a lot in fantasy football. A handcuff is basically when you have your top starting running back, he'd be their backup. So say I'll just throw mine out there for example. Alexander Madison for the Minnesota Vikings is a handcuff for Dalvin Cook. So Dalvin Cook's one of your top running backs who's going to see a lot of carries. Madison is the guy who you won't see points out of most weeks, but Dalvin Cook has an injury history. So it might be a good idea for you to go out there and get the backup to your stud running back, because then if he does miss a week, you can just slot your guy right back in and you still have control of that backfield. So that's a good example of what a handcuff is. And I think Alexander Madison is the most valuable handcuff because you're basically locking down your top 5 running back in that backfield for the entire season.
So my handcuff is Tony Pollard, the running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Tony Pollard is the most valuable handcuff in my opinion because if he was the starter, if Zeke wasn't there and Tony Pollard was the starter, he would be a top 10 running back. He's that good. And when you have to rely on him, he puts up the big points. He scores. He is a guy that defenses can't seem to figure out. hell, last year he outperformed Zeke on a lot of weeks. So he's the guy that I don't think he's going to steal the job from Zeke. But if anything does happen to Zeke that he goes down, Pollard is going to be an immediate guy that you want to start on a week to week basis. He is just itching to finally get that starting job. So I would definitely have Tony Pollard if you are a Zeke owner.
Yeah, and mine, I think George and Tyler both gave you the two best handcuffs in the game. I'm going to pivot my pick and actually go with Latavius Murray. Again, Alvin Kamara is going to be a high draft pick. You're going to want his replacement. We don't know who the running back will be there. We saw Murray play very well the last two seasons in New Orleans. He actually finished as RB31 last year, despite being behind Kamara, because he did get some opportunities. Again, another guy, he's going to go late in drafts, but he might, if you take one of these, if you take Alvin Kamara or you take Dalvin Cook or you take Zeke Elliott, you might want to prioritize their handcuff in the later rounds over, another flyer running back, just so you have a safety net for moving on. But I don't have much of a debate because I think you guys knocked out the top two. But I'll throw in Latavius Murray as the third option.
Just because I think it's interesting. Cody's original handcuff was Gus Edwards, so backup for J.K. Dobbins, and that's a little bit of a more
Trash.
interesting handcuff because, like Tyler said, they do like to use a running back committee, but there still is a good idea of if you have a committee to an extent, but not like the heavier committees. So like the Aaron Jones kind of idea too. He gets 70 to 80% of the snaps. You're going to see a couple of fantasy points out of his backup, but it's good to have that handcuff. Edwards might be a little bit closer to a 30 to 40% of the snaps, but he's not going to be a starter unless J.K. Dobbins gets hurt. So it's also another good handcuff there.
Not a good handcuff.
Yeah,
He's
so
trash, but yeah.
Tyler just hates the Ravens.
I do, absolutely.
So if you hate the Ravens, yell at Tyler. But as always, thanks for listening to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. And hopefully these early fantasy running backs rankings get you just thinking about who you might take. I know some mock draft machines are out there. Tyler's going to encourage you to get involved. You can send us your mock drafts and we'll review them. It's free. You can even submit them on our website at thecouchgms.com.
Hey, man, I know I do it every single week, but why I got to spoil what I'm going to do? Maybe I was going to change it up this week. But, it's fine. I'll just go on with my piece. Guys, everybody out there listening, ignore everything Cody just said, because what's really important is getting involved, reaching out through Twitter, through the website, through Facebook, whatever you want to do. Just make sure you come to us and get involved. This podcast is way more fun for us and a lot more fun for you when you get involved.
And whatever Tyler said, make sure you guys get involved on our social media and website. Thank you all for listening to the Couch GMs podcast. For Tyler Snyder and Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you all next week.
Boom!